Good afternoon. I'm joined to my left by Rick Cotton, actually Richard Cotton, which is what I learned today when I saw his professional ID, who's the head of the Port Authority. To my right is Melissa DeRosa, who is the secretary to the governor. They accompanied me to Washington for a meeting. We met with President Trump, Transportation Secretary Elaine Chao, and Chief of Staff John Kelly was in the room. The subject was the so-called gateway tunnels, two tunnels that go from New York to New Jersey, that carry Amtrak and New Jersey Transit. They're owned by Amtrak. We discussed a number of topics, primarily around infrastructure. We discussed LaGuardia Airport, and the President was very interested in LaGuardia and the progress that we've made at LaGuardia and the redesign of LaGuardia. And Rick Cotton was, who is in charge of LaGuardia Airport and the reconstruction of LaGuardia, actually the new construction of LaGuardia Airport, and we discussed that. The President was interested in what is a real issue, which is the length of the runway at LaGuardia, which is a relatively short runway and has raised safety concerns before. And we discussed possible ways of lengthening that runway, which would be a very big project. In theory, once New York City vacates Rikers Island, which was supposed to have happened, you could extend a runway towards Rikers Island, but that was more on the hypothetical. The President said any way he could help, he would want to help. We discussed the Penn Station situation and the progress on the post office train station, the Empire Station, the Moynihan Train Hall, and that was coming along and that would actually be online. We also discussed the tunnels that we had recently redone, the Queens Midtown Tunnel, the Brooklyn Battery Tunnel, and how long it took to do those tunnels and how we did those tunnels. And then we discussed the Gateway project. We provided some materials to the President. The Gateway Tunnel, Gateway project is really the construction of an entire corridor. It's a $30 billion project because it has a number of projects that are attached. Let me click ahead. This is the entire Gateway program. You can see that there are a number of bridges involved. There are track expansions involved. Two different bridges, Portal North, Portal South, Secaucus Junction and Bergen Loop, New Jersey Rail Yard to be built, Penn Station expansion, which is a very large project in and of itself. It basically constructs a new Penn Station next to the existing Penn Station. So it is a massive undertaking that needs to be done. It would provide a much accelerated corridor from Newark through New York and would make a great difference. And I believe in the Gateway project. The most urgent need, however, are the Hudson tunnels, because they have the longest lead time. If you were to start construction today, you have to complete an environmental review, you have to go to bid. If it was done in 7, 8, 9, 10 years, that would be very, very fast. The remainder of the projects you can do much faster than you can build the tunnel. So I'm focused on the tunnels, number one, from a safety point of view. Number two, if we lose one of those tunnels, just lose use of the tunnel, it will have a devastating impact. And it is the long lead item. When they talk about construction projects, what's the long lead? The long lead item here are the tunnels. Bridges we know how to build, track we know how to lay, but the environmental and the construction of a tunnel is the long lead item. So we were focused on the long lead items. The design of the tunnel is something that we have discussed in the past. The tunnel comes up on the Manhattan side on the back end of Hudson Yards. The tunnels are only one piece of the overall Gateway project, but a vital piece. And then the tunnels themselves, they are inarguably in a state of decay and decline that is troubling and frightening. They're 100 years old. They were filled with salt water from Hurricane Superstorm Sandy. The chlorides that were deposited by the salt water still remain. Once you immerse electric cables and metal conduits and relays in salt water, only bad things happen afterwards. We've taken extensive efforts to try to repair, clean, fix, but just the condition is irreparable at this point. And it is only a matter of time before we have a serious mishap in one of those tunnels where we lose use of one of those tunnels. The meeting was actually provoked by the video of the tunnels that I had sent to the president, which these are pictures from that video. And it's just undeniable. The president has a background in construction and has a knowledge of construction. And these pictures, for anyone who's familiar with construction at all, are frightening. You have slabs of the ceiling that are falling onto the track, let alone the danger, God forbid, a piece of cement falls on a train. Even if it doesn't fall on a train, falling on the track, falling on the wires, all of this is totally problematic. And you're talking about one of the most critical junctures in the entire northeast corridor. One of these tunnels goes down. It's not just the commute from New Jersey to New York City. It is all the train traffic to the northeast United States. And the northeast United States is 20% of the nation's GDP. So this is a national issue. New York does not own the tunnels. New Jersey does not own the tunnel. They are federally owned. My first position as governor of New York when this issue came up was the federal government should pay 100% because the federal government owns them. Amtrak owns them. We have our own tunnels that we have to pay for. The federal government should pay for their tunnel. As time went on, the state agreed, we agreed to pay 25%, New Jersey would pay 25%, and the federal government would pay 50%, which I think is a very generous offer on behalf of the state. But that was the topic of conversation. The president was rightly concerned with the question of how we would do this. The president is skeptical of government construction contracts. I am skeptical of government construction contracts. Know what you do in life, know what you don't do in life, right? The most important thing to know is what you don't know. Government does not know how to build. For those in government who take offense, I'm sorry. It is a different craft, a different trade, a different knowledge base. So the president was familiar with the way we did the new Tappan Zee Bridge. We were talking about that mode as a modality for the construction of these tunnels. The Tappan Zee Bridge was different because government did what government can do, and then we had the private sector come in. Master plan, the vision, the purpose, the function, but then let the private sector bid it internationally, get the best price, get the shortest period of time, provide an incentive for faster delivery, sanctions for late delivery, but let the private sector do it. I said I would do these tunnels the same way. I've worked with Amtrak to be charitable. I don't believe Amtrak is the best vehicle to manage this project. Amtrak is in the train operation business. That is a different business than the tunnel boring business. We would set up a corporation, 3 representatives, 1 from New Jersey, 1 from New York, 1 from the federal government. Let that streamlined corporation manage the entire process. Let it go to bid. Let's get the best bids. The only estimates we have right now have been prepared by Amtrak because Amtrak owns the tunnel. So when we say $13 billion, that's an estimate provided by Amtrak. When we say $30 billion for the overall project, that's an estimate provided by Amtrak. The president's concern, and my concern is, you want me to sign on the bottom line for 25% of the tunnel, 50% of the tunnel cost for the federal government. What is the actual cost? And we are talking very large numbers here. And if it's 13 billion, I want to know that it's 13 billion and 13 doesn't become 14, doesn't become 15, doesn't become 20. So from a process point of view, streamline corporation, go out to bid, get real bids so we know what we're really talking about in terms of financial exposure. That's the process that we spent quite a bit of time talking about. I think it's fair to say that the meeting was a positive meeting. I think it's fair to say that the president was receptive to what we were talking about. And the president said that he wanted to take the next steps to find a way forward. And the next steps would include working with the federal government, primarily the Port Authority, working with the federal government Department of Transportation to find out how we could get to the bidding process and give bidders the security to know that this is a project that is going and it's worth their time and investment to come up with bids so we have certainty as to what the ultimate financial exposure is. I think that is a fair characterization of the meeting. The follow-up will be done with Mr. Rick Cotton, Chief of Staff John Kelly, and Department of Transportation Secretary Elaine Chao. But it was all positive. It was all good. The president got it. He had a surprising amount of knowledge about the infrastructure projects that we're doing in New York. Again, he is a development construction background, so he knows these issues, and he knows the questions of process and bidding and making sure the exposure is what everybody expects. So it was a very productive conversation, and we'll be following up for next steps. Did I leave anything out?
Nope.
No.
Governor, the president has been widely reported has been withholding support from this project because of the border. Did that come up? Do you believe that's the case? Do you think that the bigger political situation is going to be a lasting impediment here?
That did not come up. I'm a realist. There's politics in everything, unfortunately. I think in many ways this situation is bigger than politics. I think it's in some ways dwarfs politics, because you're talking about safety, you're talking about a vital need from a transportation point of view, you're talking about possible economic catastrophic circumstances if these tunnels fail, and I think that supersedes any parochial political interest, you know. From my point of view, I'm a Democrat. I've been highly critical of the president on a number of levels. The president has been highly critical of me on a number of levels. But this is not about my politics. This is about, I represent the people of the state of New York, period. And I will act in the best interest of the people of the state of New York, and that comes first. I dealt with a Republican Senate for many years, Republican president. I'm not going to put my politics before the interest of the people I represent. And I think that's the essence of what this meeting was about.
Governor, on that point, President Trump, we had interviewed him just before your meeting, and he did say, I have a good relationship with him. You know, Governor Cuomo, I like him, he likes me. And he goes, you know, he was asked about, obviously, you criticized him during your re-election campaign, and he said, that's politics. So how would you describe your relationship with President Trump?
Yeah, look, we have basic political differences. I've been very verbal about them. In my blunt New York style, I don't think I've minced words. On a number of issues, immigration issues, economic issues, taxation issues. I think the SALT tax reform is an assault on New York. I mean, I've been highly critical for a very long time. The president has been very highly critical of me also. So we have very basic political differences. And heartfelt political differences. But again, if you are a responsible public official, you don't put your politics before the interests of the people you represent. I'm a Democrat. I had a Republican Senate for 7 years. I had many political differences with them. I could have said, our political differences, and we'll have a political fight about it, and we'll get nothing done. Many people operate like that. That's what gridlock is all about. That's what the polarization is all about. That's what New York State was all about when they couldn't get a budget done. I think that's irresponsible. I think that's reckless. I think it's selfish. I think it's narcissistic. Who cares about you and your politics? That's nice that you have politics. You represent the people of the state. The tunnel could collapse. Fiorello LaGuardia, basic paraphrase. There's no Democratic or Republican way to fill a pothole. There's no Democratic or Republican way to fix a tunnel. The water comes in, the tunnel collapses. That's not a Democratic problem or a Republican problem. It's a problem for everyone. Let's remember why we were elected, and let's stop putting politics above the interest of the people you serve. That's what I try to do.
The president has a history, critics would say, of seeming to agree to things in meetings, but then changing his mind or basically ignoring what he said. Is there concern about his consistency in this?
You know, this is such a basic situation, right? There's no policy issue in these pictures, right? He knows what this means, and he knows the impact of this situation and the consequences of this situation. Now, his concerns, as discussed at the meeting, were how do we do it so it doesn't become a governmental boondoggle, so it's not another government project that takes a long time and winds up being very expensive. Those are very legitimate concerns. The Tappan Zee Bridge he was very aware of, and what we did on the Tappan Zee Bridge is an exception to the rule, right? Most government projects, large construction projects, name one that was done on time and on budget. Name one that didn't turn into an embarrassment for everyone involved. The Tappan Zee Bridge is almost unique in that way. Why? Because we did it a different way. You didn't have government contractors. You didn't have government designers. It was all private sector. And that's the way we want to do this project.
So did the president commit funding? I know that the administration has said that this agreement you referenced with the Obama administration, the 50 of the states and the feds, they don't recognize that as existing. Did the president allude to that agreement, or are you suggesting that he agreed to that split, provided that you do a design-build process with some new, corporation? I'm trying to drill down on specific.
Yeah, Jimmy, we did not get to that point. We spent a lot of time on the process and how this would not become inefficient, overruns, late. We spent a lot of time on the process. I think it's fair to say that we both had confidence in the process that we discussed, especially since we have done it before. Also, by the way, same modality we're using at LaGuardia Airport. I said I won't build a project that doesn't have private construction because he's right, and I'm right. We've seen too many botched government construction jobs. So I feel good about that. We did not agree to funding because we agreed we're not sure what the funding amount is. These are Amtrak estimates. Well, look, depending on the number, I'm not going to sign a check until I know the number in the box on the check. Amtrak has said it's $13 billion. With all due respect to Amtrak, I'm not ready to sign a check based on a 25% on an Amtrak estimate. I want a better feel of what the price is going to be, and I want to know what the actual contract is and what my exposure is. I'm not signing a check on an Amtrak estimate. And the president's not signing a check on the Amtrak estimate. So we need real bids to know what the range of the exposure is. How do we...
Just the tunnel? Breaking the tunnel off from Gateway in general?
Breaking the tunnel off from Gateway, because the rest of the projects on Gateway, Jimmy, you can do. We know how to do these other projects. And you're talking on the other projects 2, 3 years, 4 years. The tunnels, we're talking about possibly 10 years. So start the longest lead item first. It is also the most complex item. It is also the most complicated bidding process. It's also the piece that places the greatest risk to collapse of the system. The other projects are basically enhancement to the existing system. This project, the tunnels, are the essence of the existing system. That cannot fail, and that has to be done, and that takes the most amount of time. We need the entire corridor done, but we need the tunnels first and desperately.
Governor, if the Democrats had to be able to vote on whether or not they would have to choose to fund a border wall in order to make sure the funding of this tunnel project goes through, do you think congressional Democrats should vote for that then, because this project is so critical?
No. Short answer, no. I don't support the border wall. I think the border wall is a political icon. I believe it's a metaphor, political metaphor for stopping immigrants. Immigration is bad. Close off the country. So no, I would not, and I think that's a political bargain. I would not make a political bargain funding for a legitimate project for funding of a political icon, which is the wall. Democrats will say we need border security. That's true, because it makes no sense where you have controlled entrances if you don't have controls on the other sides, right? You can't say this is a controlled entrance, but by the way, we have a hole 100 yards away. But border security is different than saying a wall, and I would not trade anything for a wall. I spoke to Senator Schumer, and I said to him over a period of months, I've said publicly, funding a wall to me is a non-starter and is non-negotiable.
Why do you think today was different than any other meeting that you had? Do you see that the president really understands this besides the video that you showed him in the previous meetings? Could you describe something today that you saw different than any other meeting to know that this is going to go forward once you do have the correct bid?
The president was very positive. Again, the president and I want to know what we're signing before we sign. What is the total exposure? I think what the video did, what these pictures do, it strips away all the politics. And it strips away all the little argumentation and the sniping back and forth. Here is a tunnel. It is under the water. It is crumbling. What do you want to do? Period. Well, I want to talk about tax reform. I want to talk about your... Okay. The tunnel is collapsing. What do you want to do about the collapsing tunnel? There is no other answer. Fix the tunnel.
Governor, from the general sense of positivity around the meeting, did you get any firm commitments to, for example, have the DOT sign off on the environmental review so that they could put the project out to bid, or get Amtrak to release the money it's holding on to for the Portal Bridge? Like, were there any firm commitments?
We talked about accelerating the preliminary activities, EIS, etc. But the main question is, and this is me as much as the president, I'm not going to sign a check until I know what the check amount is. And I'm not doing it based on an Amtrak estimate. And all we have, Portal Bridge, how much is the Portal Bridge? All we know is what Amtrak says it is. I'm not relying on it.
But you can't even get a bid till you get the
No, you can. You can put out a bid. So you can accelerate all that. The problem with the bidding is very often you have to offer an economic incentive for losing bids. So that's something that we would have to think about and work through. But I want to know, as does the President, what are we signing on to before we sign it? And I'm not going to take the estimates that are on the table. I did not do the estimates. Amtrak did the estimates. We have no way of verifying these estimates. And estimates are just estimates. You know, we estimated the Tappan Zee Bridge at $5 billion. Tappan Zee Bridge came in at $4 billion. That is a big difference. And that was our estimate. You know, the difference between a $13 billion bid and a $16 billion bid, and the state has to pay 25%. That is a very big difference. So really, step one is getting to a bidding process that gives you a real number. And I will tell you this, I believe I'm already stretched to the limit at $13 billion. And if the number came in higher than $13 billion, that would have to be a totally different conversation.
The federal funding of the tunnel before the federal funding of the portal bridge?
I'm sorry?
Are you saying that you want to put the federal funding of the tunnel before the federal funding of the portal bridge?
No, I'm saying the whole Gateway project has to be funded, but where I am focused first on the longest lead item, which are the tunnels.
Governor, you said that you know how to build the bridges. Why do you, even if Amtrak owns it, why do we collectively not know how to build a tunnel, and why not just say, hey, President Trump, we'll do it, we'll handle it, and show you how it's done? Why not?
Well, first of all, it's an Amtrak tunnel.
I know, but regardless, I mean, the fact that you want it done and the federal government's putting up roadblocks, having a meeting, why not just cut it all out, say, I know they own it, I know, we've built and we can do this tunnel? Or you say, why can we not do the tunnel?
Well, we are doing that in essence. We have a new corporation, which is a subsidiary of the port, 3 people, 1 New York, 1 New Jersey, 1 federal. And that is a blank slate corporation, and that corporation will undertake the entire enterprise. Period. Great. We agree on the method, we agree on the process. By the way, how much does it cost? Well, Amtrak says around $13 billion. Okay, can we get a little more specific? Yes, you can get more specific by going to bid the actual job. And then you'll get a number of bids, and then you'll know how much it costs, and you'll know how much your 25% is. That's where we are.
Do you have a maximum budget for this project?
I'm at my maximum budget.
13 million, 25% is 3.25 billion. Is that the maximum?
Yeah. Look, you have $3.25 billion there on the New York side. You have $3.25 billion on the New Jersey side. And from my own parochial position representing the taxpayers of New York, $3.25 billion for the Cross Harbor Tunnel, Cross Hudson Tunnel. We're talking about a massive capital plan for the MTA that has to be funded. We're talking about coming into a state budget where we're going to have to fund education, health care, etc. $1 billion here, $1 billion there starts to add up pretty quickly. And that's where we are.
Some of the complaints from the Department of Transportation in the past few years is that the local share of this is essentially federal loans. Did that come up in the discussion, and would the 3.25 from New York and 3.25 from Trenton actually be sourced money from those states or federal loans? And has New Jersey, is there is New Jersey okay with all this? Have you been in touch with Murphy, or are you speaking on behalf of both states when you're talking to Trump?
We both made this agreement. The specifics, your issue did not come up today. It is typical in these types of transactions, Michael, that the state share is a federal loan that the state is responsible for. It's not that we're not responsible for it. They loan the money, we pay off the loan. We have to pay the interest, we have to pay the principal. So that's state money. Just because you loan me $100, I sign an agreement to pay you back the $100 plus interest. That's not your $100, that's my $100, right? So I don't see it as federal funding. It's a federal loan that we then have to pay.
In terms of Murphy and today's discussion, is New Jersey on
Yeah,
board?
all on the same page.
And
Is that correct on the loan, Rick? Do you want to speak to that?
Both states have made that, have taken that position. With respect to the Portal Bridge, New Jersey has actually pledged direct New Jersey money, but in terms of the tunnel, both states have proposed exactly the same thing.
The Portal Bridge is a different financing mechanism, just to be clear, right?
Yes.
How is Portal financed?
Portal right now is a combination of New Jersey dollars pledged, Amtrak dollars, and the application for federal grant funding.
would this plan also mean the discarding of this Gateway Development Corporation, which is floating out there?
The Gateway Development Corporation is the framework for the entity that the governor is referring to. As you probably know, both states have committed to seek legislation which would convert the Gateway Development Corporation into a public corporation which would have the framework that the governor was describing.
The three-person new corporation, right? New Corp, Shell Corporation, is the Gateway Development Corporation. No liabilities. It is just three people run that corporation. It's not run by Amtrak, and that would manage the project.
But that corporation is New York, New Jersey, and Amtrak, so you would...
No, New York, New Jersey, and federal appointee.
No, currently, it's New York...
Yes.
You would sub out Amtrak and put in the feds.
Yes.
Governor, did you leave that meeting feeling confident that the president is at least receptive to restoring those funds he took away for this project?
The president literally used that word. He said, I am receptive, I'm looking for a way to move forward. And it was a very positive meeting. But he literally used your word, receptive. You have the same vocabulary. And I will leave it at that.
What's the extended time frame for this new entity and for this new construction, this new planning? Given the fact that that's going to cost more money as time goes by?
There is no new time frame. We are right now at full stop, right? We had an agreement with the Obama administration, framework of an agreement. President Trump came in 2 years ago and said full stop. So we are nowhere right now. There is no clock ticking because there is no clock. So we are nowhere. The question is, how would we start a clock and start a process? And what we said today is the way we would start a process is we take this new corporation, federal appointee is the third, let's get bids, let's find out what the liability is, let's find out what the cost really is, bid the job by cost and time. Cost and time. So how much and how fast? And if the contractor comes in ahead of schedule, you get an incentive. If the contractor comes in later than schedule, you get a sanction. Well, how long is the contractor going to say it's going to take to build the tunnel? I don't know. You don't know until you go to bid and contractors actually put in the time to come up with a bona fide application. Now, there are international companies that use new tunnel boring machines, equipment, that supposedly, I don't have direct knowledge, but are remarkably fast. And remember the experience at the Mario Cuomo Bridge. The company that won was the company that had, I believe, the largest crane on the globe of its kind and could move big pieces faster than anyone else, because time is very important. So I would be very open to an international company where Europe has done a few projects that have these new high-tech tunnel boring machines and can actually save time, because time is money here.
The idea wasn't for the feds to have the seat on the Gateway Development Corporation against us. It was the feds who withdrew from the Gateway Development Corporation in the first place.
I suggested a corporation with one state, one New Jersey, one federal.
They said, okay, that's great.
That was, there was no objection to that. Is that fair?
That's fair. I think the concept is what the governor just said, which is the states have a representation. Each of the states have a representation. The feds have a representation. Obviously, it's going to be up to the federal government as to what the federal seat or seats would be.
If you cut Amtrak out, who's going to own and operate this tunnel?
Well, the concept of the new tunnel has always been that the Gateway Development Corporation would operate the facility.
They would decide traffic through the tunnel? The Gateway Development Corporation is going to run trains?
No, I mean, we're not talking about running trains. The Gateway Development Corporation, it's bridge. Think of a bridge. The owner of the bridge is simply the facility over which the traffic flows. But the notion of the Gateway Development Corporation and have to make a decision as to whether you wind up hiring a private maintainer. But the point is, it would have to be coordinated with Amtrak, obviously. But there are two railroads that run trains through the tunnel, and Gateway Development Corporation would fund, build, operate. Might do it in cooperation or by contract with a private operator. Could be cooperatively with Amtrak. Would certainly have to be coordinated with Amtrak. But those are details that remain to be worked out.
Yeah, I'm not going to sign a check for 25% of a project that I don't know is going to be competently managed and operated. It would be irresponsible as a governor. Amtrak does not build tunnels. By the way, my DOT does not build 4-mile tunnels. I wouldn't sign a check for my DOT or for Amtrak 25% of whatever it costs. I wouldn't do that. I want to know we have a different process where we're going to the private sector and it's going to be bid internationally, and we're going to use time and money as the factors in the selection.
Governor, what are you going to do if Trump refuses to put up any money? Is there any point where you're just going to do it with New Jersey yourself?
We could never afford it. Not even close. It is an impossibility. We cannot, in this state, afford to build a tunnel that is anywhere near $13 billion. We have significant financial obligations that we're looking at. The MTA is a glaring, major financial obligation. This is a tunnel that serves the Northeast, but it comes into New York City. So there is no way the two states could do this.
But what's the end game?
The
If this
Israeli
thing gets
government
wrapped
sent
up
you a
in
letter.
the
Last
border wall,
question.
if this thing gets wrapped up in the buzzsaw of what's going on in Washington right now, this is not the president's base, there's all kinds of reasons why he would not want to support this. That have nothing to do with safety or the tunnels or New York State or anything here. What is the end game? If the answer is no, you've said congressional Democrats should not trade this for the border wall if that comes to be. So what's next if the answer is no?
First of all, this does not require any legislation, in our opinion. We had the agreement signed with the Obama administration. This is purely an administrative act by the president. So it doesn't get into the legislative politics, back and forth, Congress, Senate. This is just the president authorizing his Department of Transportation to go ahead with this. So I don't see the political machinations. Your point is, what if the president refuses to help fix the tunnel? Then the tunnel doesn't get fixed. There is no alternative. It's a federally owned tunnel. It runs Amtrak trains and New Jersey Transit trains. The state doesn't own it. The state doesn't have a train that goes through it. It's bringing people from New Jersey into New York City, and that's important for the New York City workforce, and it serves the entire Northeast. I don't have a legal responsibility to the state of Massachusetts or the state of Maine. So if the president refuses to fund the repair of the tunnel does not get rebuilt.
And if I could just make one point. The governor took a lot of you into the tunnel that night to expose to the press and the public just how dire the situation is. That was the point of the video. The governor sent the video to the president. It got the president's attention. The president called. He asked us to come today so the governor could talk to him about it directly. The governor does not have any cards to play with him vis-a-vis a wall or any other political machinations going on in Washington, and yet we had the meeting today that was, as the governor described, very highly productive. So I think that it's starting to get through. I think, at a minimum, the urgency around this.
Not to be overly optimistic, but just as a counterpoint to your overly cynical. If the president had no interest in doing this, why have the meeting with me? Why?
Was it your shared skepticism about...
Right? It had nothing to do with congressional politics, had nothing to do with a wall. If the president wasn't interested and wasn't moved by the video, why would we have the meeting?
Was it your shared skepticism about the government funding, the government building that really kind of broke through to the president?
Did we bond over our governmental skepticism? I don't think so. I think we both have knowledge of construction and development. Right? Obviously, Mr. Trump has developed billions of dollars of projects. I was the HUD secretary and developed projects all across the country. I ran a not-for-profit that actually built close to 1,000 units of housing, different buildings. So I have an appreciation of what construction is all about. And we also have experience and knowledge of the government inefficiency. You have to remember, the President Trump goes back to the Woolman Rink. Many of you people are too young to remember the Woolman Rink. The Woolman Rink was an ice skating rink under Ed Koch that had gone on for a long time, and it was very expensive, and they couldn't get this ice skating rink repaired. So the way I remember it, and don't hold me to the details, Mayor Ed Koch called up Donald Trump and he said, can you come in here and rebuild this ice rink? And the city's cost was double or triple, and the time was double or triple. Mr. Trump came in with a private construction crew and got it done in a fraction of the time. So I've built many projects in cooperation with government, funded by government, etc. I operate facilities. We're telling war stories about current facilities and what we're trying to get done at LaGuardia, etc. So it's a knowledge of the industry. It's not cynical or optimism, it's realism. And government should not build. It had nothing to do with the meeting today. That's where I started. That's the Tappan Zee. That's LaGuardia. That's JFK. That's Moynihan train station. And I think it was important for the president to understand I'm not asking him to get involved in something that's going to turn out to be another government boondoggle. Because he doesn't want to be associated with it. And by the way, I don't want to be associated with it.
Governor, if this all run against him for president to get the money, would you want to control the DOT?
Would I run for president to do the Gateway tunnels? No, I don't think so.
Just a quick follow-up. DOT had withdrawn from Gateway, saying it's their practice not to sit on these type of boards. Was that decision reversed today?
No, we posed a federal appointee. He could be a public corporation, could be a private individual, could be a private corporation, could be you.
Thank you.
Regarding Airbnb taking action, would you take any action on Airbnb because of the BDS movement?
I did not see the letter. I will review it, and let me review it, and then I'll have a response. Thank you very much for taking the time.